Hello and welcome to All Raiders Talk, episode 18. So this is continuing the position breakdowns and doing the actual tight end position. I'm your host Hunter, and I'm just a fan of the Raiders and enjoy talking Raiders football. So hope you enjoy the conversation today. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get into the topic at hand, which is talking about the tight end position and specifically the tight ends on our roster currently and how they may do this year, and who may actually make the roster and such. So if you're following along, you'll see it here. If you're just listening, I'll kind of break it down. But this is going to be the actual kind of tight end as far as for the offense goes. Not much kind of additional details about Clint Kubiak's offense and the tight end outside of they ran 12 personnel 27.4% of the time, which was 11th in the NFL. I think we may see that number go up, especially with having Brock Bowers and Michael Mayer. But it'll, especially compared to Seattle's, tight ends, which were not nearly the equivalent of the tight ends we have on our roster. So I do think we may see that number go up, but it'll be kind of interesting to see how that goes. And then Clint Kubiak's offense had a .37 EPA, so expected points added per pass with a 2 tight end set, which was pretty good last year. As far as just kind of overall offensive performances, I still kind of have these from previous videos. So if you want to if you're kind of following along, you may have already heard these, but last year or in 21, as the Vikings OC, they had a scoring offense of 24th, and in 2024, Kubiak Saints offense had the 19th scoring offense, and then in Seattle last season, he had the first top scoring offense in the NFL. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get into it. There's a few more names to talk about compared to running back and quarterback, but I don't think the discussions are going to be nearly as long. So this may end up being a little bit shorter of a video here, but let's go ahead and kind of continue on. So the main one here is going to be Brock Bowers. So last year, Brock Bowers played in 12 games. He had 64 receptions for 680 yards and 7 touchdowns. So he did play hurt most of the season. So it's something where, even though he did play several games, more than kind of expected, the numbers were not of the levels that we kind of expect for Brock Bowers. It's something where realistically probably should have played 9 or 10 games instead of 12 games, and maybe even less than that. But that was just something kind of note there. So even though he did play 12 games, he was not healthy pretty much the entire season. And, in his rookie year, he had 1,200 yards and 5 touchdowns, and was pretty much like an all-pro as a rookie. So the first kind of question is going to be will he be an all-pro again this year? Most of that I think is just whether or not he's going to be healthy or not. As long as Brock Bowers is healthy, I think he will be an all-pro. I do think he is one of the best 2 receiver tight ends in the actual league, especially as a receiver, and he's a good enough blocker. He's not as good of a blocker as George Kittle, but I think he's a better receiver than Kittle. I mean, I know that may be, I could see points either way, but I do think he's a better receiver than Kittle. I do also think he's a better receiver than Trey McBride, although Trey McBride, it's close. Like I said, I could see arguments either way there too. So that's why I say he's a top 2 tight end in the league. And then, what are going to be realistic numbers for Brock Bowers this year? Do you think he could get 1,400 yards and 10 touchdowns? Is that something is that a realistic number for him? If he has 1,200 yards and 7 touchdowns, basically just a slight improvement from his rookie year. Are you happy with those numbers? Is that kind of, oh man, yeah, that's fine. That's not kind of really what I wanted out of him. So that would be kind of something of note. It's just kind of what really do we think his realistic numbers are? Feel free to, comment or reach out and just let me know what you think Brock Bowers, what his expectations this year and what you think he will accomplish this year. As far as the numbers, I would say 1,400 yards and 10 touchdowns are really like what I hope that he receives this year. Like what I think he should receive in this actual offense and with all the improvements that we've made. So let's go ahead and continue on to our number 2 tight end, which is going to be Michael Mayer. Last season, he had 35 receptions for 328 yards and 1 TD. So, Michael Mayer is both a receiving and a blocking tight end, but his receiving numbers have really kind of never really followed suit. Part of it is just because he's been injured. He also stepped away from the team, and that's going to be kind of one of the big questions is like, can he play a full season? He has yet to play a full season with the team, but I think Michael Mayer could be a number 1 tight end for other teams. So it's something that's like, is he actually going to live up to that kind of potential when he was drafted in the second round? Because it's something where if he's playing at the top of his game and plays a full season, I think he could be a very good tight end and, like I said, a number 1 tight end for other teams. Like, he'll never reach those numbers here with Brock Bowers, so like I don't think that's proper expectations for him, but it's still something like he has to be able to have a good season to kind of show that he's what his worth. And it's like, can he have a career? Because I don't think that's going to be a lofty goal. I mean, he's the most yards he's had in a season is 328, which he had this last year, and then the most touchdowns he's had in a year is 2 touchdowns. Like, that's not very high goals. I mean, for a tight end too, maybe you consider that a little bit of lofty goals, but I don't think that's very lofty at all of a tight end too. But Michael Mayer is going to see a lot of snaps, especially in like the 12 personnel. I mean, Clint Kubiak ran 12 personnel like 25% of the time, so basically a quarter of the time they're going to be in those 2 tight end sets, and that's going to have both Michael Mayer and Brock Bowers. Occasionally you'll work in someone like Ian Thomas, like who we'll talk about next here, but Michael Mayer is going to be that number 2 guy, and it's like, can he play full season, and can he be the player that we expected when we drafted him in the second round? So even before we had Brock Bowers, I think a lot of us kind of expected Michael Mayer to be our number 1 tight end, to be, the big honcho there. But, the following year we drafted Brock Bowers, and then Michael Mayer's kind of fallen to the wayside. I mean, not truly just because I think all of us still hope that he's going to be a really good tight end, and we all kind of still believe that, but it's something where it's like the expectations of him kind of really have fallen off after taking Brock Bowers, and Brock Bowers kind of taking all the highlights there. So we'll kind of see what kind of goes from there. As we get into the next tight end is going to be Ian Thomas. He was re-signed for kind of a 1-year deal. So it's something where Clint Kubiak did like Ian Thomas, probably after watching the film. He didn't play necessarily a ton of snaps. He had 318 snaps, but he only had 13 receptions for 114 yards. He is probably slightly more of a receiving tight end, but he played more as far as like a blocker last year, so his blocking definitely kind of did improve. And the 2 kind of big questions with that is, one, can he beat 318 snaps? Which was our 3rd highest snap total for a tight end. I think it was Michael Mayer had something like 420, 430 in that area. So it's something where that's going to be about 100 snap difference, and especially with increased 12 personnel that I expect us to run, how many of those are going to involve Ian Thomas, and whether or not he can beat, like I said, that 318 snap total. And then can anyone actually beat him for the tight end 3? There, we do have a few more names I'll talk about. None of them, I'm sure, none of them I actually believe will be able to take that tight end 3 spot from them, so I'm not necessarily too worried about it. There's maybe one guy that I think has a shot to kind of push him if you're looking for more very specifically a blocking tight end role, and I'll kind of bring that name up kind of at the end. But otherwise, it's pretty much Brock Bowers from, leading the charge a mile away. followed by Michael Mayer, and then there's even a big gap between Michael Mayer and then Ian Thomas, and then really there's just kind of a mix of names really kind of after that, and we'll kind of get into those here shortly. But I think, like I said, Ian Thomas is going to be the number 3 tight end. I think he'll probably get more than 318 snaps. As far as whether or not he'll beat his totals, probably a little bit. I mean, it's something where if he had 25 receptions, 230 yards, and like 1 or 2 touchdowns would probably be a realistic expectation, unless Michael Mayer gets hurt or does not play as often for any reason. Then I think those numbers could potentially go up. Or if Brock Bowers misses any time again, or if they end up using Brock Bowers more outside like they've done in the past and decide to kind of run more 2 sets with Mayer and Ian Thomas, with having Brock more on the outside playing more of like a wide receiver role. That would be the other way that Ian may receive additional targets and snaps that are maybe a little bit unexpected. So as we continue on, now we start getting into really the lesser names. These are going to be more of like, can they make a 53? Can they make a practice squad? Will they have any impact on the team this year? And that's going to start with Albert Okunbonham. I'm probably saying that wrong. Albert O. My apologies on the name. So really last year, I mean, he had 5 receptions for 36 yards. I think he only ended up playing like 1 or 2 games last year. He was on the roster, I think, most of the year and practice squad. But, can he make the 53 this year? I don't expect him really to make the roster. I think they're the 2 guys kind of behind him are the 2 guys that I would really think are going to make the 53 and kind of make the practice squad. Maybe you do just kind of want a veteran just because he does have experience. He's been in the league, I think, 5 to 7 years. So it's something where just having a veteran tight end in the room is not necessarily a bad thing to have. But you already have Brock Bowers as kind of like he's not maybe a true vet as far as an older vet, because he's still on his rookie deal, but I think he, just from his skill level and kind of leading by example, I think you're fine with Brock Bowers in that role. But if you do want an older veteran tight end just to kind of have that in the room, Albert can play that role. But if he's going to play that role, I think it's going to be only as a practice squad member. As we can continue on, it's going to be last year's undrafted free agent who made the roster, and now it's going to be Carter Runyon. He only had 1 reception for 3 yards last year, but he was kind of a developmental guy, a little bit more of a receiving tight end, a little bit less of a blocking tight end. So that's why he kind of was at the bottom of the depth chart, just because it's harder to play a receiving tight end in that role, especially when you have Brock Bowers, Michael Mayer, and then Ian Thomas as like your top 3 guys, all of them having good receiving capability. It's not like your top two tight ends are like true blocking tight ends, and it's like, okay, well then maybe it's a little bit easier to get a guy like Carter Runyon a few snaps as far as a receiving tight end. That's just really not the case here. As far as whether or not he can make the roster, I'm not sure if he's gonna be able to make the roster as a receiving tight end. I do think he can make the practice squad, and whether or not he has a future here, I think it'll be kind of interesting to see. It's something where maybe he does have a future, maybe not necessarily as much this year, but going into the next season, because this will be Michael Mayer's 4th season. And then, then he'll be a free agent, and whether or not you want to pay to kind of re-sign Mayer, and then and then Ian Thomas is also just kind of on a 1-year deal, so he may not necessarily be back here next year. So then maybe you have someone like Carter Runyon and come in, be in his 3rd season, and be able to kind of take that role as far as that number 2 or number 3 tight end kind of role. So that would just be something where if he has a future here, I don't necessarily think it's an immediate future. I think it's more of a long-term future. And then finally, there's just kind of one more name I'm going to bring up here, and that's going to be Patrick Gurd, which is going to be the undrafted free agent tight end out of Cincinnati. one of the kind of interesting notes about him kind of already was he was brought in here as a tryout. We did sign another tight end to an undrafted free agent contract, which was Matt Lauder. And actually, Patrick Gurd made the 90-man roster over Lauder. So they actually released Lauder and signed Patrick Gurd. So it's something he came in as a tryout and actually already beat a signed undrafted free agent rookie. So he kind of already has a little bit of a step forward compared to some others. As you can see, his 2025 college season, he only had 3 receptions for 46 yards, so he's really not a receiving tight end. In his 5 seasons, I mean, that was never really his role. He had 4 previous years at Ohio State, and he was really just kind of a backup and / blocky tight end. So as far as the kind of questions for him is, can he be a true blocking tight end for us? I think it's certainly possible. I think it kind of depends on kind of where he is as far as his strength goes. I know he was listed at like 240 in college, but if you look at like the Raiders like roster, they list him at 250, so he may have already put in a little bit of bulk as far as kind of weight goes. Because if you want a blocking tight end, you want someone who has the strength, not necessarily, you obviously don't want a tight end like Gurd to take on Myles Garrett or anything, but you need someone who can kind of help the offensive linemen, so help like a DJ Glaze or a Charles Guerin at right tackle or a Colton Miller at left tackle. I mean, even though I know Miller can hold his own, if they're going to be in that role, you want them to be able to help whoever's there, and then you need to be able to kind of hold their own for a short period of time against an edge who's rushing, against a linebacker who's kind of blitzing, coming off the edge, against a cornerback who's coming through. And if there's not anyone there, you need them to be able to hit that second level and kind of block out a specific player. And I think it's possible that Patrick Gurd can play that role. Going into this draft, I did think we needed a true blocking tight end, just because I don't think we have one on the roster. Just because Brock Bowers can block, but it's not his main skill set. I do think Michael Mayer is a decent blocker, but he's still probably a little bit more of a receiver than a blocker. Ian Thomas is definitely a better receiver than blocker. Albert O just kind of is okay at kind of both, and then Carter Running is more of a receiver. So all of our tight ends are probably more receiver first, blocker second, and I think Gurd is probably the only blocker first, receiver second. I mean, the receiver's probably much further down as a second, but as a receiver second kind of role there. So I do think that if he's going to make the 53, it's going to be purely off of that skill. So, that would mean Albert O wouldn't make it. That would mean Carter Runyon isn't make it. And that would probably also mean that you're carrying 4 tight ends on the roster. I'm not necessarily sure if we carry 4 tight ends, but if we do, that I think Gurd has the highest possibility of making it over Runyon and Albert O. If not, I think he's pretty much a lock for the practice squad. Unless he just really, it's just not a good blocker in actual reality once the preseason comes in, and it just kind of shows on the tape that he just doesn't have the skill to understand the offense and be an actual blocker and tight end. So with that, that's going to be the actual tight end position. This one's not nearly as long just because there wasn't nearly as much to actual talk about. So with that, you can find all my content here on YouTube, or if you're listening, you can on podcast at All Raiders Talk, and you can also find me on Twitter and X. Very much appreciate everyone kind of listening or watching today. Like, comment, subscribe, give me any feedback if you'd like. It's appreciated. And with all that, till next time, talk to y'all next episode. Peace.